Hey, welcome back to Naval News with Subbrief. I didn't forget the title. You did. Okay, we're going back to the Caribbean Sea where U.S. law enforcement has boarded and seized oil tanker Skipper. And most of you have already seen this footage. This is U.S. official footage showing a boarding operation of U.S. law enforcement. These are not Navy SEALs or anything. This is law enforcement. Think Coast Guard, FBI, maybe a DEA guy if he's got rope experience. None of these guys look like they've ever seen a rope before. The whole roping down was kind of funny, but it's not easy to rope on a ship either, so let's not get there. Let's not go on to that. So what makes this legal? Why did this even happen? That's what we're going to talk about today. And I'll just say I can't fast rope either, so I'm not going to complain about their proficiency doing that. So we're going to take a look at how U.S. sanctions work. Let's begin with, we're going to focus on Venezuela and specifically Venezuelan oil. Venezuelan oil is very different than, say, the country of Venezuela or any other country in the world in that it's a commercial asset. And so there's like very specific restrictions whenever it comes to sanctions about assets and commercial activities. And so we're going to draw a distinction right now that while we are talking about Venezuela as a country and all the problems it has, we're talking about Venezuelan oil specifically not being able to be sold or even transported by Venezuelan, by any ship from Venezuela to any other country. And that's how we got to the point you just saw. Let's back up to about 2014, 2015. The Obama administration saw human rights violations occurring in Venezuela. They got concerned. They declared a Venezuela Human Rights Criminal Act of 2014 and said that there would be sanctions imposed on Venezuela if they continued to treat their citizens in inhumane ways. This was being observed. The United States wanted to do something about it, and that's the Obama administration's part in this whole series. It kind of started back then around the 2014 timeframe. So we have an election in 2015, 2016, a new president, President Trump's first term. He writes 3 sanctions against Venezuela, 1 per year, starting with Executive Order 13808, which restricts transactions, not all of them, but a lot of transactions between the United States and Venezuela. And this has a lot to do with accounting and funding a business, getting bank loans, and then distributing stocks via corporations that operating the oil fields essentially out of Venezuela. That begins in 2017. 2018, Venezuela doesn't make any changes to their human rights violations and how they're doing business, creating drugs and shipping them everywhere, not just the United States. So in 2018, we have another executive order that adds additional restrictions, making it harder and harder to do business in Venezuela. The entire time, Venezuela could talk to the United States and reverse these, and these could be gone practically overnight. As fast as these are signed in the Oval Office, they could be removed as well. But Venezuela really doubles down during the Trump administration for whatever reason and will not comply. They're like, we're going to do business with everyone else. If you don't want to do business in the United States, that's fine. And so in 2018 or 2019, after that's been said, the Trump administration, right before the next election, fully blocks all transactions with Venezuela. We're like, we're just not going to be doing business, and don't buy their oil, can't transport it. We're sanctioning Venezuelan oil and the transport of that as well. So I want to talk about how these executive orders and sanctions are written and developed. We're going to go down that path first to understand the legality of the United States president, the leader of the executive branch, and the commander-in-chief of the military, and really the most powerful man in the world, quite literally, is called that not just because he has the most powerful military at his disposal. He also has all of these economic tools that he can wield, and he's wielding them quite frequently against Venezuela in this term. So whenever the executive branch, the president of the United States and his team want to create a sanction, they go to the Office of Foreign Asset Control. Office of Foreign Asset Control is a very small office, about 220 people that do very good work. They're accountants, they're very smart, and they're career employees. These are not like elected officials. These are career government employees that do a very important job in the Department of Treasury. Department of Treasury is part of the executive branch, reports to the president. So this is all in-house executive branch at this point. What they do is they look at foreign countries and make up lists of what each country owns, if the country itself has assets. Then they look at companies that operate out of that country, groups of people, organizations, and that may be more than one type of conglomerate doing an organization. And then finally, individuals. And then they list those type of what assets are held by those business owners and whatnot, and any shell companies that they may have, because a lot of these countries are very clever at using more than 20 shell companies that trade with each other before getting back to the original source. And you, as an accountant, have to follow that money from one, hub to another, one company to another. Even though that company may not have any employees and no physical address, it still exists as an entity. And that's what this office does. They follow that money, and they're like, if you want to sanction Venezuelan oil, here's a list of individuals, here's the company, and here's the leaders of the country that, in this case, control the flow of oil and, by the way, drugs through the nation. So they write the sanction and are responsible for enforcing the sanction. This is a very important office that nobody ever talks about because it's buried inside the U.S. government, but they do a very critical role. So welcome to the spotlight, Office of Foreign Asset Control. I think you do a great job. I'm a fan, okay? Now, what they do, or what happened here with Venezuelan oil, after the Obama administration had done its not really sanctions, but had talked about the human rights violations, and then Trump comes in with his literal sanctions and limits transactions, all of this goes before a U.S. federal court. The court does not determine if they like it or not, or if they agree with it or not. All the U.S. federal court is doing is determining if the U.S. Constitution gives the president, the leader of the executive branch, the power to do this. And each one of these cases, the answer is yes. So the U.S. federal court says, yes, you can make these sanctions. These are legal to implement from the United States. So all of this so far is in-house. This is the United States using United States law to sanction a country outside of the United States, and individuals and groups of people and so forth, and companies like that. That's the process, and that's why it's legal to do this inside the United States. We're going to expand that a little bit in just a second. Let's keep moving forward in our timeline. We were at 2019. In 2020, we had an election, and then a new president. President Biden and his administration comes in, and they see everything that's going on in Venezuela, all the sanctions and the human rights violations that were pointed out by the Obama administration. And they're like, all right, let's slow this down. Let's give Venezuela a chance. Let's open up talks with them. Let's initiate the talks from the United States and try and reverse this trend. Because the goal is not to sanction oil. The goal is to stop the human rights violations and get a free and fair election complete. That's the goal. So let's work on doing that instead of working on punishing them. So in about 2021, in that time frame, they begin backdoor communications with the Venezuelan government to say, hey, we want to come to the table and hammer out an agreement where there will be free and fair elections in Venezuela. And if you agree to this, we'll relieve some of those sanctions, not all of them, but if you just agree to talk, we'll take some of them off. That's what Venezuela did. They saw an opportunity and they took it. So for close to a year, there was talks between Venezuela and the United States over having free and fair elections. And in 2023, they came to an agreement. This happened in Barbados, so it is known as the 2023 Barbados Agreement to have free and fair elections in Venezuela. Great. U.S. reduces the sanctions. They can trade and move oil a little bit easier without as much penalty as before. And they begin the process of selecting candidates in Venezuela. So obviously the president of Venezuela at the time is going to be one of the candidates, and he's registered and just waiting on election day, right? Well, there's an opposition party in Venezuela as well, and they select their candidate. This candidate's very popular, has a lot of votes. President's a little nervous about that. So what happens whenever the opposition party registers their candidate, the registry, not the president, but the people that work for the president run the registry, say, hey, you can't, that candidate's not qualified. The reason why they can't register that candidate is its own rabbit hole that we don't want to go down at this point. Just know that the opposition party cannot register their most popular candidate to run against the sitting president in 2024. So that's a real problem. What they do is the opposition party says, fine, we'll pick someone else. They pick a second choice. The same thing happens when they go to register that candidate for the election. They're denied. Again, if you want to know more about that, go Google it. It's very interesting. So it is clear at this point that the president of Venezuela is using the election process to prevent anyone that has any kind of popularity to run against him. That is a clear and open, not even disguised, violation of free and fair elections, which they promised they would do in 2023 in Barbados. So instantly, April 2024, credit to the Biden administration, puts full sanctions right back on Venezuela. All Venezuela did was buy themselves maybe 2 years of reduced sanctions by lying, and they destroyed any credibility of coming to the table and negotiating in good faith. We have another election. We have a new president who has been briefed by what happened in the past 4 years, and he sees that Venezuela cannot talk. Whenever they go to negotiate, they will never do what they promised to do. So he goes ham on Venezuela immediately. He's sworn into office early in 2025. He puts a 25% tariff on all goods coming out of Venezuela. To be fair, he did the rest of the world as well, but Venezuela got a lot. 25% is pretty high. That was Executive Order 14245. And after the summer goes by, it's not really producing anything. Obviously, we have a big Navy down there now stopping the drugs coming via water. That's kind of a separate issue, but there's a military buildup between that executive order and November 26. November 26, about a month ago from this recording, a warrant is issued for the skipper, the MT Skipper, a merchant tanker, has an actual warrant issued for its arrest, which would be a seizure because it's an object, but still, you can issue a warrant for a ship. I honestly didn't even know that that's how that was done. That was pretty wild to learn recently. But yeah, so we're going to go detain, or actually arrest, it's not even detaining, an actual tanker at this point. And on December 10th, you see the video of federal law enforcement boarding this vessel and literally arresting it. And then from here, it's going to be moved to a port. It doesn't even have to be an American port, but it'll be moved to a port where will be detained while it's being processed. Where that goes is beyond the scope of what we're talking about today. I know a lot of people are saying, oh, we're doing this for the oil. And if you mean for the oil in the tanker, there's about 1.1 million barrels of oil in this tanker right now. And some of it's Venezuelan, some of it's Iranian oil going to, I think, China. So that's about as far as I know. The point is, the United States, we pump out of the ground and process 13.4 billion with a B barrels of oil a day, and we export only about 4 of that, keeping the rest, the other 9 billion, for ourselves. So whatever's in this tanker doesn't even scale on that measuring stick. So we're not doing this action for oil. In the grander scheme of things, I could see that argument, but this seizure of this tanker is literally enforcing a sanction on Venezuelan oil. That's what's happening here. So we used our Constitution to write a sanction that was announced by the president after it was found to be legal in a U.S. federal court to stop the sale and transportation of Venezuelan oil, a commercial asset. And when that was violated by a ship, a arrest warrant for that ship was issued. A federal law enforcement agent, including Coast Guard and FBI, I believe there may have been other agencies as well, but those two got a ride, a support ride from a Navy helicopter to go and seize the tanker, which is where we stand right now. So that's why it's legal. That's why it happened. And what happens next is the ship's going to be moved to a port, and then they'll resolve it in that port. Because of this legal framework of being able to seize ships, legally in this framework, we're going to be able to do this again. The very next ship that comes out of Venezuela full of oil, I believe that it's going to be seized as well. I wouldn't be surprised if we see this again. because we've set ourselves up. Not only do we have a precedent now of doing it, we have the legal authority to do it. And I don't see any reason why we don't do this every single time a ship leaves a Venezuelan port full of Venezuelan oil. Now, let's address the elephant in the room. And I left this to the end for, obvious reasons, I think. I get a lot of questions from you, and thank you, please keep them coming, saying, how can the U.S. do this? Even though I've explained it twice already. Why don't other countries put sanctions on each other? And they do. They absolutely do. Let's put an example, and I'm just making this up. Let's say Egypt wants to sanction something out of Peruvian oil or whatever. Well, they can. As long as their constitution says that they have the authority to do that, then they can certainly do that. But how is Egypt going to enforce it? How are they going to get to Peruvian oil and stop it and seize it? And then after they seize the ship, what are they going to do with it? How do they get it to a port that's going to be friendly? And if they have to take it back to Egypt, that's a hell of a trip. So the point is, the United States has the ability to facilitate this law enforcement action globally because we have about 10 of these aircraft carriers. We have a global Navy that is in every theater around the world every day. So all we need to do as the United States is write the sanction, make sure it's legal with our own process, and then if it's violated, send our law enforcement boys and girls out there to go and seize that asset. Whether it's illegal weapons, illegal drugs, illegal oil, whatever the asset is, it can be seized as a law enforcement action supported by the biggest, strongest Navy in the world. There's nothing stopping other countries from doing the same thing, except they can't. The closest would be China. China could sanction something and then enforce it in areas that they have a presence. And they do have a presence, say in like Eastern Africa, around the Horn of Africa. They do have a base over there with some naval ships. They could enforce it over there, and they do. They fight the pirates coming out of Africa over there. They do a good job. Something to be lauded. The Chinese do some good work around Africa whenever it comes to pirating and stopping it. So maybe they don't like competition. Anyway, my point is we have a very powerful Navy that supports this kind of sanction enforcement. No one else has that. Most countries will simply take their sanction idea, their complaint, to the United Nations and say, as a globe, can we agree to put United Nations sanctions on this commercial asset or this country, and then stop that kind of trade as a globe? And they can do that process. That's happened in the past. That's probably the more common process. The U.S., the United States can use that process too, and we do use that process. We also don't have to. We can do it independently because we have a Navy to facilitate the enforcement at sea of our sanctions, which is exactly what we did. It's legal, and we'll do it again.